Welcome! You're listening to part 3 of this now 3-part series on board games. Today I'm going to talk about meaningful choices. If you've been reading, watching, or even listening to game reviews for a while, chances are you will have stumbled over this phrase before. Meaningful choices. You might be tempted to think that every good game offers meaningful choices, whereas every bad game fails to provide them. Now, before you get carried away by a reviewer's energy, ability to turn a phrase, or the professional look of their equipment, let's examine this nebulous term a little. What makes a choice meaningful? They are, after all, mentioned with some regularity in board game discussions, with the unspoken assumption that if you are following these discussions, you will surely have a firm grasp as to what does or does not constitute a meaningful choice. Haha, you say. That's easy. It's okay, fine. You may not have an academic definition of it handy right this minute, but a meaningful decision is like a decision that feels meaningful, or like has meaning, but not like big meaning, but like in the game. Like a decision that is not devoid of meaning. Okay, fine. So definitions are fuzzy, but maybe it's like art or porn. You know it when you see it. And isn't meaning like subjective anyway? So I can't ever be wrong regardless of what I say. That's how subjectivity works, right? And alright, enough with the questions. I didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition. It feels like there's something missing here. So, let's assume, out of necessity and for my own peace of mind, that not only do meaningful choices exist within games, but that we can also recognize them regardless of personal preference or taste. These things will naturally affect how we evaluate certain edge cases, but at the very least, we can agree that there are some core concepts that all meaningful choices incorporate. Core concepts that aren't sufficiently present in meaningless decisions. I've found 4 of those concepts. Some are only present in a diminished capacity, some are front and center, but I have not found a game that has meaningful choices that fully ignores any of those 4 concepts. Effectiveness, transparency, duration, and agency. So let's start from the top and work our way down from the most to least self-explanatory. First, effectiveness. That is to say, how much do things change by us making a decision? If that decision has little to no effect on the board state or on other players, it would seem pointless and irrelevant. Whereas a decision that fundamentally changes how the game will progress is greeted as being pivotal, essential, meaningful, like taking off your pants when playing Twister. Now, quite a few games have found ways of keeping players fully clothed while still making decisions meaningful, without the crutch of attacking other players. So instead of choosing to slow down another player's progress, decisions are about how we can significantly influence our own advancement towards victory. Like constructing your own deck in Dominion, or your own victory point engine in 51st State. Our decisions aren't about putting down other players, but instead aim at improving our own lot, as best and as efficiently as we can. Personal preference and taste plays a role, though, in how we value this effectiveness. Is gaining or trashing a card in Dominion a small or a significant change? Is setting up a trade agreement instead of an attack in 51st State a notable change in our progression, or just a trivial detail as the game moves forward? The answers to such questions must refer to personal preference. But once we think that choices have fallen below our red line of significance, they are meaningless to us. Point 2. Transparency. In order to make an informed choice, you need information. Game design and game development must constantly answer the question, how can players easily collect all pertinent information in order to make an informed choice? In a game of chess, almost all pertinent information is baked into the rules of the game. Once you know what each individual piece is capable of, you can make an informed choice which piece to move, as you can calculate all possible responses to your action. That makes the decision to move pawn to d4 meaningful, since you won't be blindsided by something like dragon scorching row d, thus making your effort to find the move that best fits your strategy meaningless. As for another example, imagine having to pick one of 3 boxes without knowing what's inside of them, or even knowing what could be inside of them. If you have no way of vaguely guessing what kind of consequences a decision may bring, is that decision really meaningful, or are you just enacting random chance? But chess also shows another hurdle when it comes to making the intricacies of the game's design as transparent to the player as possible. Experience and an intimate knowledge of unique situations massively improves your decision-making ability. Maybe you recognize certain openings in chess, or you know what kind of special card ability a netrunner deck may have, or you can tell how certain decisions in the early game of A Feast for Odin will have repercussions later. These bits and pieces of information can and should be considered when you play. In most cases, you have to play the game multiple times to have a wide range of experiences to draw from in order to make informed and thus competent choices. This understanding of a design's interconnectedness has been described as heuristics, and most designers and developers are aware of this barrier to entry, going so far as to add helpful strategy tips in the rulebook to help players quickly get to a better experience, as those basic heuristics allow you to make more meaningful choices. This leads to the unusual but actually quite accurate conclusion that your first play of any game that requires high-level heuristics will have your decisions be close to meaningless. If you don't know what the consequences of a decision may be, if you don't know which factors will affect the outcome of your decision or how they will do so, your decision is as meaningful as a coin toss. Point 3. Duration, which is just about long-term consequences to individual choices. When we think of meaningful decisions, we not only think of those that had a significant impact on the game, or on the ones we made with the full knowledge of the facts, but also of decisions that have consequences that carry over into multiple rounds, if not the rest of the game. You know, like tattooing Yu-Gi-Oh on your forehead. Don't tattoo Yu-Gi-Oh on your forehead. But any decision that evaporates into thin air as soon as it's made makes said decision trivial, or, inconsequential. Without lasting impact, no decision can claim to be meaningful. Consequences that are still felt multiple rounds after you've made a choice make that choice carry weight, and by extension meaning. In 7 Wonders, your decision which resource generating cards to draft will stay with you until the end of the game. You need to gain access to resources early on in order to pay for more powerful cards in later turns. So instead of just being an aimless warm-up to guide us into the finer points of card drafting, our choices set us on a path that can't easily be abandoned halfway through. New options become available to us, while others fall by the wayside. As Rainer Knizia pointed out, this is true of bidding games as well. When an individual bid this turn influences our bidding options in following turns. Our choices matter because we will have to live with the consequences. They have meaning because they will not be undone easily or quickly. The last concept to contribute to the meaningfulness of a decision may also be the most esoteric of the 4. Agency. The idea that we as players are actually in control of our decisions, that the decision isn't taken away from us through the game's design. Decisions where one option is by far the best aren't really decisions. At the very least, they are not very meaningful. If the game is littered with such choices, it becomes dull and unengaging. The same is true for choosing between options that are functionally identical. Interestingly enough, in this case, it is not personal preference that demands we introduce some nuance, but the analytical capabilities of the player. If a player needs to put some effort into figuring out that all options are actually the same, that all roads lead to Rome or one of its fancy suburbs, there is still something to keep up one's interest. The choice itself may not be meaningful, but figuring it out is. So these are the 4 concepts that I consider to make up meaningful choices in games. Effectiveness, choices that lead to a change in the game. Transparency, all relevant information is available. Duration, consequences that aren't undone immediately after choice is made. And agency, a sufficient variance in choices, none of which are clearly the optimal pick. Individual players may have different preferences as to when a decision fails to fulfill the bare minimum of any of those 4 concepts, but it is along those lines that decisions are considered as either meaningful or trivial. All this comes with one caveat though, and it's a very fundamental one. Calling something a meaningful choice carries a value judgment, and as is the case with all such judgments, you need to understand the wider context to recognize a choice as meaningful. If you have a hard time registering the changes that a decision brings with it, if you can't parse all the information available to you, if you have a hard time connecting the dots between a decision and the game's state in later turns, or even if you can't figure out whether options given to you are functionally identical or heavily favoring one over the other, the game's meaningful choices will remain hidden from you. In fact, in order to enjoy meaningful choices in a game, you need to understand the game well enough to notice these things, if not consciously, then at least by way of intuition. These skills of observation and analysis are the things that unlock meaningful choices for you, and more than that, these are the skills that make it easier for you to win. Which is just as well, since that is going to be the topic of the next lecture. Thank you for listening. That is all.